Part 16 of X, There Was a Man, the saga of Gordon Kahl, a true story, the top of page 146. Although the Medina Four all had remorse that the marshals were killed or disabled, they were optimistic about their chances in court. They were all devout Christians, and their consciences were clear. What had they done that was wrong? None had any trouble sleeping at night because of guilt. They themselves were the victims of an assault. The objectives which the marshals sought did not justify the means and methods used. A penchant exists in modern society to blame the victims. They were to be tried on criteria other than that of a Christian conscience or common law wrong. Later, in answer to a TV reporter, David Brower said, "We shall be acquitted by telling the truth." U.S. Attorney Crooks told him the following day that telling the truth would not get him acquitted. Crooks was correct. No other TV interviews were permitted. Look, these are real names. I'm not making them up. Wigglesworth the elusive, Crooks, and Fisher the prosecutors. How ironic. The government entered a motion in limine to exclude the philosophies, organizations, religions, taxes, and other extraneous subjects from being proper topics of questioning. I got to interject personal commentary from Rudy. Because we run a prison ministry, we see this very often. Whether it be Schaefer Cox, Anthony Troy Williams, Ed and Elaine Brown, the courtrooms that are temples to Baal will not allow any mention of Holy Scripture, the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, or any constitutional arguments. They put motion in limines. You need to look that phrase up, motion in limine. And they tie the hands of the defendant before the trial even begins. And that's what they did here. The government entered a motion in limine to exclude the philosophies, organizations, religion, taxes, and other extraneous subjects from being proper topics of questioning. This was supposedly to keep the trial from being diverted to these side topics. The U.S. attorneys were to later violate their own motions at times with the effect of biasing the jury against the Medina Four. What was to be the plan of the government to assure conviction and yet provide for the sake of an appearance and an apparition of a completely unequivocally fair trial? First, use the kitchen sink approach of charging each defendant with multiple crimes. If accused of enough things, the person must be guilty of something. This could hardly occur without some manipulation of a grand jury, which clearly did not understand its responsibilities. Second, hold the trial in North Dakota, where press coverage and sympathy for the families of the marshals were greatest. Third, use the Benson court, where consistently favorable rulings for the prosecution could be more nearly assured. Fourth, put the widows of the slain marshals and put the disabled marshal on the witness chair, not for evidence, but to prejudice the jury against the Medina Four. Next, hammer on the idea that Yorie shot first, even though the prosecutors were firmly convinced that Muir shot first. This was to be done by mistaken witnesses, such as the Reardons, and by liars, such as Cap and others. Then use expert evidence, regardless of cost, to implicate the defendants using photos of gore and blood if possible. Make the jury believe Yorie or Scott actually hit someone, even though the idea is excessively remote, and that Scott executed Cheshire. Show a conspiracy even though none existed in fact. Be insistent that Judge Benson used judicial rulings consistently favorable to the prosecutors. Get 2 FBI agents rather than the allowable one to assist with the prosecution, then bring one of them on as a witness. Lastly, be adamant and vitriolic in using emotional language to inflame the jury. Examples of indignation would be terms like scene of the crime and murderers. Again, this was not to be an effort to seek justice, but rather to win, to get vengeance. Just as well call a spade a spade. The best laid plans of mice and prosecutors would go awry where evidence is so weak or non-existent, all other things being equal. The single variable that tips the scales is the judge. The trial is largely subject to his direction by a number of discretionary techniques. The very atmosphere of the trial is under his control in large measure. One big stick held by the judge is his determination of applicable law. Jurors are improperly intimidated into not questioning his findings in this regard. It amazes me how a jury that can be so infallible in reaching a conclusion of fact cannot be trusted to hear and give proper weight to some information. An example of this is Grandpa's letter, which was not to be admitted into evidence. Anyway, the other really big tool of the judge is deciding which information and argument the jury may consider, excluding all others. Who is that, babe? A verdict often hinges on the judge's discretion in admitting evidence. It can work to the favor of either adversary. Jurors, by and large, are common folks who want to do a good job, but are woefully ignorant of the criminal justice system. Since the trial judge is the apparent authority, they typically equate good performance with pleasing the judge. They can sense what he desires them to do. He tells them point blank what they are not to do. Jurors operate in a strange environment which is foreign to them. Yori had plenty of time to mediate during his recuperation incarceration awaiting trial. At times he thought of his family and his third child, who was soon to be born. He remembered childhood experiences. Memories are made of such events as when the Kahls made an extra long trip to Crane for the winter. Yori was 8. They visited relatives in Iowa, then detoured to a short Florida vacation before driving to Texas. They enjoyed the beaches. About halfway to Texas, Freddie said to Grandma, "When are you ever going to bake bread again?" The 4 car-weary children had tired of snacks and restaurant fare. Grandma had always baked the family's bread. Balking at going into a cafe, all 4 said they wanted bananas and peanut butter. Grandpa didn't like messes in cars, so Grandpa made a deal with them. They wouldn't tell. She bought the items in a grocery and fed the kids monkey style, passing the quickly snatched peanut butter on banana pack between the seats of the station wagon. Grandpa said, "Do I smell peanut butter?" They replied, "We don't smell any, so you couldn't have." Truthful little Lonnie, though always so good, blurted, "Yes, Daddy, Mama gave us bananas and peanut butter." The stuffed kids then slept for hours. Grandpa never again argued about bananas and peanut butter. The Medina 4 were apprehensive about the Benson court. Their anxieties were justified, as illustrated by the sentencing. First-degree murder carries a mandatory life sentence. Second degree carries lesser penalties, with the life sentence being optional to the judge. Scott and Yori were to be convicted of second-degree murder even though tried for first degree. Judge Benson sentenced them to life in prison on that count. They killed no one. Lynn Martin reports that one juror later said they were told to bring in a second-degree conviction. The strategy for Yori and Scott at the trial was to be self-defense regarding the shooting and firearms. On the other charges, the Medina 4 were to plead that they were innocuously caught in a malevolent circumstance which was created by others. Chapter 22, Wounded Knee. Great Spirit, a Sioux, man, I don't know how to pronounce that word, S-I-O-U-X, a Sioux. Great Spirit, a Sioux proverb goes, "Help me never to judge another until I have walked in his moccasins for 2 weeks." 2 FBI agents were killed at Wounded Knee in 1975. The resultant trial in Benson Court with Lynn Crooks on the prosecution team was a bad omen for the Medina defendants. The following excerpts from the Crazy Horse Spirit explains their sobering perplexity, their ominous anxiety. In March and April of 1976, the U.S. government presented affidavits purportedly from Myrtle Poorbear, a mother of a young child from the Pine Ridge Reservation. In the affidavits dated February 23rd and March 31st, 1986, Poorbear claimed she was present at the Oglala on June 26, 1975, and saw Leonard Peltier shoot and kill the 2 FBI agents. Let me pause there and say Leonard Peltier is still in prison today, August the 25th of 2019. This fact was not known to Peltier's lawyers at the time. Myrtle Poorbear had also signed an affidavit on February 19, 1976, when she claimed she had left Oglala the day before the FBI assault, and that Leonard Peltier later confessed his feat to her. Based upon Myrtle Poorbear's second two affidavits and others submitted regarding physical evidence, Leonard Peltier was ordered to be extradited by a Canadian court in Vancouver, British Columbia. It was subsequently learned that the affidavits of Myrtle Pourbaix were a total fabrication by agent David Price and his new partner William Wood. Imagine that. I got to interject some personal commentary. Imagine that. FBI agents fabricating evidence. Like that doesn't go on every single day. Okay, the two agents had Myrtle Pourbaix incommunicado for months, separating her from her daughter and friends, and alternately threatened and befriended her. At one point, when Myrtle Pourbaix went to back out, they showed her photos of Anime Aquis's body, telling her the same could happen to her. As FBI agents, it seemed they could do anything they wanted to do. Though the workings of the FBI, the city of Vancouver, British Columbia, through the workings of the FBI, the city of Vancouver, British Columbia, was kept in fear by constant false reports of violent escape plans and terrorism. For Leonard Peltier and his supporters, this meant oppressive security measures for the FBI. It meant control of courtroom proceedings. The same basic approach of fear and intimidation was a major government tactic around Peltier's trial in U.S. District Court in Fargo, North Dakota in early spring. In 1977, local law enforcement and the media were told of large numbers of armed supporters coming to the trial, of threatened escape attempts, and of violence and destruction. Jurors kept under 24-hour guard by U.S. Marshal SWAT teams during the 6-week trial were made to believe they were in serious danger from Peltier and his supporters and family. The most outrageous government action, however, came during the trial itself. With apparent collusion between Judge Paul Benson and the FBI, the government was permitted to present 5 weeks of perjured and coerced testimony and often presented manufactured and irrelevant physical evidence. The defense was limited to 2 days and prohibited from presenting evidence to prove the FBI had created its case against Peltier. The defense was prohibited from questioning FBI witnesses about major contradictions in their reports, about evidence they suddenly discovered about threatening children caught up in the confrontation, about deals by agents made with a rapist in prison who then signed affidavits that Leonard Peltier or his co-defendants had confessed to them. Judge Benson refused to allow the defense to question RCMP Corporal Parlane about his suddenly remembering incriminating statements at the scene of Peltier's arrest, which were not mentioned until a year and a half later. Another example of the denial of a defense was an attempt to counter FBI agent Frank Coward's testimony. What a name, FBI agent Frank Cowards. That's his real name. Testimony that using a 7X rifle scope, he had observed Leonard Peltier, Darrell Butler, Rob Robidoux, and James Eagle running from the scene. The defense was not only prevented from showing Eagle was not there that day, but also when a local weapons expert testified that the alleged sighting was impossible due to the distance involved. Judge Benson told the jury the defense was wasting their time. Benson further ruled that Myrtle Pourbaix's testimony about the FBI did to her, what the FBI did to her, would not go before the jury since it would tend to confuse them. The judge's actions ensured the verdict the FBI wanted. On June 1st, 1977, Leonard Peltier was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences for something he claims he did not do. He was immediately sent to Marion, Illinois, the U.S.'s most maximum security prison, as well as the location of the government's behavior modification unit. Leonard Peltier's attorneys have been actively working on a motion for a new trial since his first appeal was denied by the Supreme Court in 1977. Keep in mind this book was written in 1991. I'm reading this book in 2019, and Leonard Peltier still sits in prison. Think of the differences in those dates. The new appeal must and will be based on newly discovered evidence showing the government knowingly used false evidence to convict him. From material released recently through the Freedom of Information Act, they have succeeded in finding conclusive evidence that the Federal Bureau of Investigations and the United States Prosecutor's Office actively participated in covering up critical evidence that could prove Leonard's innocence. The document received through the FOIA clearly showed that both branches of government manipulated and falsified critical evidence against Leonard. Unable to determine who actually killed the two agents, the government decided to prosecute the three oldest men it could place in the area: Leonard Peltier, Rob Robidoux, and Darrell Butler. In June of 1976, Darrell Butler and Rob Robidoux went on trial in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. In July, an all-white jury acquitted Butler and Robidoux, who had argued self-defense. When the FBI attacked a camp of women and children, they simply responded. The evidence against Butler, Robidoux, and Peltier was the same. During the Butler-Robidoux trial, the defense was permitted to show the FBI's conduct during the investigation and the preparation of its case. The two co-defendants of Leonard Peltier were able to present the facts, and they were acquitted. Was the Benson Railroad to run again, becoming notorious for disregarding the Constitution? Was this a harbinger of things to come? As a retired marshal described Judge Paul Benson, his only qualifications for district judge were that he had a law degree and an uncle who was a U.S. Senator. Benson had been practicing law for a small law firm in Grand Forks. He had not become one of the more shining members of the firm. His office remained towards the back. After his elderly Republican uncle was nearly beaten in an election, he arranged the appointment of Benson as a lifetime district judge. One might suspect that Paul Benson was ready to discourage the shooting of federal lawmen in the Dakotas, regardless of how justifiable the circumstances. Chapter 23, The Trial. The trial commenced on May the 9th, 1983. Defense motions for a continuance of several weeks had been denied. Originally, the trial was scheduled on May the 2nd. Security in the courtroom was extremely heavy. Perhaps they feared Grandpa would attempt to rescue his family. More plausible, the subtle suggestion to the jurors of the intense precautions was that the prisoners were part of some greater evil scheme. Personal commentary from Rudy. When they put Schaefer Cox on trial, they treated the courtroom with men in black uniforms all around the courtroom with automatic weapons and helicopters. They were doing this to intimidate the jury in the same manner that you're reading about right now.
And the Bundys.
And they did this to the Bundys as well. The subtle suggestion to the jurors of the intense precautions was that the prisoners were part of some greater evil scheme. Jurors passing by them, handcuffed to one another, and knowing the searches, received a definite psychological message. The burden seemed on them to discourage shootouts, they must have thought. Some of the marshals serving as bailiffs harassed the prisoners. One was told that no gestures or eye contact would be permitted in court. Although the defense attorney got this corrected through the judge, other techniques were used, ranging from rough manhandling to sometimes transporting the prisoners one at a time, thus making them wait after the court day unnecessarily. Absurd rectal inspections for drugs were 4 times a day affairs. The trial could not be more eloquently described than was done concisely by Yorey at the time of sentencing. He told the judge, "We are not guilty. This thing was quite a corrupt injustice. That says it all." The Chief Justice in the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals was to agree with the essence of Yorey's conclusions later, although 2 others did not. Chief Justice Lay wrote, "The record amply demonstrates the defendants did not and could not receive a fair trial in the District of North Dakota. At the time of the trial, there existed in the district so great a prejudice against the defendants that they could not obtain a fair and impartial trial at any place fixed by law for holding court in that district." The Fargo Forum newspaper printed 68 news stories about the matter during the first 44 days relating to the Medina incident. These included 22 pictures, many on the front page. TV and radio coverage was extensive. Concerning these, Chief Justice Lay writes, Descriptions of Gordon Kahl's fanaticism, the violent and unique nature of the crime, and the feelings of hostility against the defendants were extensive. Marshal Muir of Fargo was one of the most respectable law enforcement officers in the area. Deputy Marshal Cheshire was also well liked and respected. According to reports, over 1,100 people attended their funeral services. The cold-blooded killing of Cheshire heightened the agitation, not only in the small, peace-loving farm community, but throughout the state. The governor directed that all state, county, and local flags be flown at half-mast in remembrance of the two marshals. Funeral eulogies and editorials condemning the killings and paying tribute to Muir and Cheshire were printed in the district's largest selling newspaper. Anger and shock thus spread across the entire district of North Dakota. The media created a connection between the defendants and Gordon Kahl. Substantial doubts have been raised about the effectiveness of the voir dire examinations as a barometer of the jury impartiality in this case. Under any standard of review, the districts wrongly failed to grant venue in the exercise of this court's supervisory powers. The defendant's conviction should be vacated and a new trial should be granted in a district remote from that of North Dakota. In another place, Judge Lay noted the failure to change venue failed to meet the American Bar Association standard for criminal justice. I know that being from Texas as I am, it's hard to be humble, but in all humility and for the life of me, I can't understand any fair-minded person who reads the 16 volumes of trial transcript finding any of the Medina Four guilty of second-degree murder and such. What? Yes, I know there's a town in Texas named Humble. It's misnamed. 78 prospective jurors underwent voir dire questioning. Half of these, 39, were excused as potentially partial due to pre-trial publicity or knowledge of persons involved in the prosecution. Were the other half uniquely devoid of media influence or simply less forthright? One of the selected jurors admitted that his mind was pretty well set at an earlier date, although he did not claim to have any opinion at the time of voir dire questioning. I'm going to pause there at the top of page 156. The next part will begin and resume at the top of page 156.